Welcome to the deep dive. We grab a pile of research, tear it open, and basically give you the core insights fast.
That's the plan.
Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating and sometimes pretty weird world.
Definitely weird sometimes.
It's all about fraternal secrecy, these ancient claims, and unfortunately, modern fraud, too. We're looking at, recognized versus clandestine Freemasonry. It gets confusing.
It really does. And damaging.
Right. And to really get why this distinction matters, you just have to look at some of the real-world chaos. The stuff caused by groups exploiting the Masonic reputation.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we've seen some truly bizarre things. Remember those guys in California? They formed a Masonic police department
Unbelievable.
and got arrested
Yeah.
for impersonating police. They claimed their authority went back to the Knights Templar or something, completely invented lineage.
And that's just the weird stuff. Then there's the serious reputational damage. Our research really highlighted that case with Dr. Conrad Murray.
Michael Jackson's doctor.
Yeah, right. Exactly. During his trial, his lawyer actually tried to use his Masonic membership, to build credibility, make him seem trustworthy.
How does that work out?
Well, he's convicted, and the media, they didn't make any distinction. It wasn't, oh, this guy's part of a bogus group. It just became...
The Masons killed Michael Jackson. I remember that narrative.
Yep. The entire fraternity globally kind of took the hit for a group that wasn't even recognized as legitimate by the mainstream bodies. Guilt by association.
That's pretty rough.
Precisely. And that's why this deep dive today is, I think, really important for you, the listener. The sources we looked at, they lay out a pretty clear spectrum. We need to define it.
Okay.
We need to clarify who's considered legitimate, who's maybe legitimate but irregular, and who is just plain bogus, and maybe most importantly, expose the tactics. Because these clandestine groups, they can be really convincing.
Okay, let's definitely unpack that. The word clandestine itself is a bit loaded, isn't it? Historically, sometimes one Grand Lodge just called another one clandestine if they didn't like them or weren't, in agreement.
That's true. It has been used politically within Masonry, but for our purposes, looking at the sources, there are clearer definitions we can use today. It really boils down to two main things: lineage and standards, adherence to the core principles.
Right. So based on the research, what are the three main categories we need to understand?
Okay. First up is recognized or regular Freemasonry. Think groups like the United Grand Lodge of England, UGLE, or the recognized Prince Hall affiliated bodies.
The established ones.
Right. The key thing is they're charted with a direct, unbroken line. It traces right back to one of the original founding Masonic authorities, that's UGLE, which formed in 1717, or the Grand Lodges of Scotland or Ireland. And they stick pretty closely to what are called the ancient landmarks, core tenets, like a required belief in a supreme being, having the volume of sacred law, the Bible, Tanakh, Quran, etc., present in the lodge.
Gotcha. So lineage enrolls, but I have to ask, and this comes up a lot, why in 2024 should legitimacy hang entirely on a piece of paper? Essentially, a charter from 300 years ago. Doesn't that just feel like, I don't know, institutional gatekeeping, protecting the old guard?
That is absolutely the central tension here, and it's a valid question. But what the research emphasizes, and what Masons themselves generally believe, is that the lineage is the authority. It represents the legitimate transmission of the tradition.
From the original operative Masons, the stoneworkers.
Exactly, that link back to the people who actually built things. Without that traceable connection, the view is that the organization lacks the historical and sort of doctrinal authority to confer Masonic degrees properly. It's not seen as valid.
Okay, so that's regular. What's next?
That brings us to category 2, legitimate but irregular Freemasonry.
How can you be both? Legitimate and irregular. Seems contradictory.
Yeah, it sounds, but it makes sense in context. These groups do have genuine historical roots. They can trace a lineage. So they're not bogus or fake, but they've deviated from some of those fundamental landmarks or doctrines that regular Masonry holds essential. The classic example everyone points to is the Grand Orient de France.
Ah, right. They're recognized by some, but not by UGLE and its affiliates.
Exactly. They lost that UGLE recognition quite a while back, primarily because they dropped the requirement for members to believe in a supreme being. And they also started admitting women, which is another major departure from the regular standard. So real history, yes, but different principles now.
Okay, so we have the established regulars and the irregulars who have history but broke the rules, basically.
In a nutshell, yeah.
That leaves the third category. The ones causing the kind of trouble we mentioned at the start. The outright fakes.
That's category 3. Clandestine or bogus Freemasonry. These are lodges, or even entire supposed Grand Lodges, that operate completely without recognition from any established regular Grand Lodge.
He just popped up.
Pretty much. They lack any legitimate lineage, any real authority traceable back to the origins. They're essentially self-created, and this is a really crucial point our research stresses. Getting a business charter from the state, like registering as a nonprofit.
Yeah.
That is not a Masonic charter. The state isn't a Masonic authority. It can grant legal status to operate as an organization, but it can't grant Masonic legitimacy.
That's a critical distinction, especially, I imagine, when things get messy legally or reputationally.
Absolutely.
Now, this whole issue gets particularly tangled when we talk about Prince Hall Masonry because of the long history of segregation and separate development in the U.S. Let's pause here because this causes so much confusion. What did the sources clearly state about Prince Hall-affiliated PHA Masonry?
Right, this needs absolute clarity. The evidence, based on the historical documents and recognition practices, is conclusive. Prince Hall-affiliated Masonry, the PHA bodies, are recognized and fully legitimate.
Okay.
Their original charter, African Lodge number 459, was granted directly by the premier Grand Lodge of England back in 1784. That's the lineage. That's the recognition.
So where does the confusion come from? Because you hear arguments all the time.
The confusion usually arises from two other types of groups. First, there are what are sometimes called Prince Hall origin groups. These are bodies that resulted from schisms or breaks away from the original recognized PHA structure over the years.
So they might share some history, but they're no longer part of the recognized body.
Correct. And then second, you have various other non-Prince Hall Black Masonic bodies, which have absolutely no connection to Prince Hall's original charter or lineage at all. Some of these are, frankly, spurious or clandestine groups trying to leverage the Prince Hall name or history.
So, bottom line, PHA itself, legitimate and recognized. The confusion comes from splinter groups or unrelated organizations.
Exactly. PHA is recognized by UGLE and the vast majority of U.S. state Grand Lodges. Full stop.
Okay, that's crucial context. So back to the truly bogus groups, the clandestine ones, it really sounds like their entire existence is built on, well, smoke and mirrors, an illusion. How do they actually do it? What are the tactics they use to fool people?
Well, their main weapon, as you said, is illusion. It's mimicry and visibility. The sources say they're often quite convincing to the average person.
How so?
They'll have their own buildings, sometimes quite large and official-looking. They wear elaborate regalia, aprons, jewels, collars, often very flashy and expensive-looking. They perform rituals that might look, very similar to legitimate ones on the surface.
So they look the part.
Completely.
Yeah.
And they choose official-sounding names. They might add words like international, free and accepted, modern, maybe even incorporated after their name. This makes them sound like established, legitimate institutions, not just some club someone started.
They're basically trying to borrow or steal, really, the 300 years of history and cultural weight that legitimate masonry has.
That's exactly what they're doing. And they compound this by fabricating authority through self-recognition.
What does that mean?
It means they make treaties or alliances or declare mutual recognition with other unrecognized bogus bodies. So Group A says Group B is legit, and Group B says Group A is legit, even though neither has any actual historical basis. It creates this kind of tangled web of fake legitimacy.
An echo chamber of fakeness.
Precisely. And they often invent origin stories. One really famous example the research points to is this debunked Romanian charter myth. A guy named John G. Jones used this supposed charter from Romania back in the late 19th century to claim he had authority to set up lodges all over the U.S.
And was it real?
Not at all. He later admitted under oath, I think it was around 1910, that the whole thing was a complete fabrication, cooked up by some expelled Mason. But for years, he used it to build his organization.
Wow. So just outright lying about your founding documents. But it's the financial structure you mentioned earlier that sounds particularly exploitative. Less like a fraternity, more like a business. Maybe even a pyramid scheme.
That observation is spot on, based on what we found, especially when you look at certain large organizations, like one called the International Free and Accepted Modern Masons, or IFAM.
IFAM, okay.
It was actually registered legally, not as a sovereign Masonic Grand Lodge, but as a fraternal benefit corporation. And the sources describe its operations as being run very much like a business. They even have a CEO-like figure, often called a supreme president, instead of a traditional Grand Master master who governs with the consent of the lodges.
A supreme president.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very Masonic. Having a CEO immediately flags it as being maybe built for profit, not principle.
It absolutely sends that signal.
Yeah.
And the business model itself often revolves heavily around recruitment, which is, highly characteristic of pyramid schemes.
How so? What does the research find there?
Our sources detailed specific systems within groups like IFAM. For instance, members could apparently get paid commissions, like $5 for every $3 in dues collected from people they recruited.
Wait, they get paid more than the dues collected. How does that even work financially?
It points towards needing constant new money coming in, right?
Yeah.
And there were apparently big bonuses offered too, like $50 plus maybe the initiation fees just for setting up a new lodge if you got 25 or more members.
So the whole focus shifts. It's not about learning or charity. It's about hitting recruitment numbers.
Exactly. Organizational effort gets channeled entirely into growth metrics, bringing in new people and their money, rather than any kind of esoteric study or community service.
And what about financial transparency? You mentioned it being run like a corporation. Does that mean members get, like, annual reports or can see the books?
Quite the opposite, usually. There's often a severe lack of transparency. The sources pointed to situations where money collected from things like raffles, banquet tickets, fundraising drives, it often seemed to go directly into the pockets of the high-ranking leaders.
With no real accounting.
Little or no formal bookkeeping or accountability back to the members who paid the money. So if you're a member, you might have no idea where your dues are actually going, which eventually forces people to confront the reality that they might just be funding someone else's lifestyle.
Man, I can just imagine the impact on someone who joins sincerely, looking for brotherhood, maybe spiritual growth, enlightenment.
Yeah.
And then they slowly realize they might just be a cog in a machine designed to make money for the people at the top. What's the psychological toll? What happens when people realize they've been duped?
It can be really devastating, and sometimes the initial experience itself is deeply disturbing. One source shared a pretty harrowing account of an initiation.
What happened?
Well, the candidate described being blindfolded for hours, forced to wait in this oppressive, sweltering heat, no air conditioning, stripped of all their personal jewelry, then subjected to this intense, almost police interrogator-style questioning about all their personal flaws and weaknesses.
That sounds awful. More like hazing than ritual.
It really crosses a line. And then, still blindfolded, being exposed to symbolic elements, air, water, fire, in a way that felt disorienting and maybe even unsafe. It sounds like fear-based control, not enlightenment.
Definitely. And after going through something like that,
the person described having this unshakable feeling of dread and anxiety afterwards, not inspiration. And this seems common. These groups often promise profound self-discovery, ancient wisdom, esoteric truths, but they consistently fail to deliver.
so the substance isn't there.
Right. Many members eventually come to feel, as one source put it, that the organization is really just an excuse to get together and have a bite to eat with their buddies. The deeper meaning they were searching for just isn't there. Or worse, it's built on lies.
Now, the sources mentioned something interesting. That even when people realize they've been tricked, they don't always just leave. Sometimes they dump ship.
Yeah.
But to another questionable group, why? Why that kind of confirmation bias?
Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon, but it seems to happen a lot. It's like a massive sunk cost fallacy.
You've already invested time, money, belief.
Exactly. The sources call it a bad habit. These bogus Masons might hop from one irregular or clandestine body to another, kind of ignoring all the red flags each time. They desperately want their initial experience or degrees to have meant something.
So they refuse to believe it was all invalid from the start.
Right, because accepting that means acknowledging the lost time, the lost money, the embarrassment, the feeling of being fooled. It's easier, psychologically, to just find another group that looks Masonic and tells them their previous degrees are somehow transferable or valid.
And this is where the high-level deception really kicks in, isn't it? If you have members who are desperate to feel legitimate, they become perfect targets for leaders who offer secret knowledge to justify why their group is the real deal, even if it's unrecognized.
Absolutely. The leaders of these clandestine groups can really capitalize on the inherent secrecy of Masonry itself. They'll twist quotes from respected Masonic figures, like Albert Pike, for instance. Well, Pike wrote things suggesting Masonry conceals its secrets from all except the adepts, and sometimes uses false explanations to mislead those who serve only to be misled. Now, in context, that was part of a complex philosophical discussion.
But these guys use it differently.
They use it as justification, like,
Right.
See, mainstream Masonry is supposed to mislead you. We have the real secrets they're hiding. And this becomes the excuse to invent new, Higher secret degrees, things beyond the standard 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite.
Like the mythical 34th degree or something even higher.
Exactly. They dangle these fabricated higher secrets to keep members hooked, especially the ones who are questioning things. It keeps them paying dues, attending meetings, believing the real truth is just one more expensive degree away.
It's a cycle of exploitation built on hope and deception. Ultimately, though, the research suggests that for many members, the illusion finally shatters, right? What's usually the breaking point?
Often, it's when the leaders themselves are exposed, maybe involved in financial scandals, embezzlement, or even criminal activity. Or perhaps they simply get cornered and can't logically explain their group's supposed lineage or where all the members' money has actually gone.
Does a facade crumble?
Right. And it forces the members into what one source called a lose-lose situation.
Mhm.
Either they have to accept that their Masonic degrees, their status, were never valid in the first place, or they have to accept that the leaders they trusted are, well, corrupt or degenerate. Neither option feels good.
No, definitely not. Which brings us right back to the core lesson here. For you, the listener, it sounds like due diligence is just absolutely critical.
Paramount. Legitimate Freemasonry, whatever you think of its traditions, is generally understood by its members to be about self-improvement, ethical conduct, charity. It's not supposed to be a shortcut to getting rich or gaining power or influence.
So, if someone is looking into any fraternal organization, especially one claiming deep history like Masonry, what are maybe 2 or 3 practical red flags they absolutely need to watch out for?
Okay, key takeaways. Education and skepticism are your friends here. First, demand transparency about lineage. Ask directly. Where did your charter come from?
And what are you listening for?
You want to hear a clear, traceable line back to UGLE, Scotland, or Ireland, or recognition from a Grand Lodge that does have that lineage. If they get vague, talk about mythical charters or can't show proof of recognition from an established regular body. Huge red flag.
Okay, lineage first. What else?
Second, look very closely at the finances and structure. Does it operate with a CEO or a supreme president? Is recruitment heavily incentivized with cash payments? Is there any transparency about where dues, fees, and fundraising money actually go? If it feels more like a business, especially one lacking accountability, be very, very suspicious.
Makes sense. Lineage, structure, and money trail.
Exactly. And for people already involved in regular Masonry who are trying to combat this issue, the advice from the sources is generally to focus on education, not just attacking. Use evidence. Ask those probing questions calmly. Can you show me the origin of your charter? Can you demonstrate the unbroken line of recognition? Often, the lack of credible answers speaks for itself.
That's solid advice. This has been a really necessary and I think clarifying deep dive. We've laid out the standards for legitimacy, the difference between regular, irregular, and just plain bogus. And we've exposed some of the really concerning tactics used to exploit people.
Hopefully, it helps people navigate this complex landscape.
Yeah. And it leaves us with a final thought, something to maybe chew on. We've talked a lot about legitimacy resting on who recognized whom, 300 years ago.
Right, that historical anchor.
So, despite all the history, the battles, the hundreds of bogus groups out there, if the entire foundation of legitimacy in a major fraternal order ultimately rests on that kind of historical recognition,
Yeah.
what does that maybe suggest about how we view power and legitimacy in other institutions today? Things that aren't Masonic like universities, maybe even governments or corporations. Is authority always just inherited, or can it be earned differently?
That's a really big question. Does legitimacy always need that unbroken chain stretching back centuries? Or can new forms of authority emerge and be valid? It definitely makes you think about the nature of institutions and power itself. Something to ponder long after you've finished listening.
Definitely something to think about. Stay curious out there.
And keep seeking the truth.